Gyarados, Marowak, Nihilego, and Tapu Koko, which we've seen on stream already. And we're actually just going to see a return coming out from this Porygon 2 straight away.
Yeah, so this is actually the very first turn of the second game. The Magnezone went for a substitute that was broken by Hariyama. And we've seen Celesteela go for a Leech Seed on the Porygon, and Porygon, yeah, launched that frustration after what I would assume to be a download boost, which did a lot of damage to that Hariyama. So, yeah, we didn't really miss too much of that first game, as we said. Eric Rios won that, and we've seen him on stream before, but his full team, Celesteela, Hariyama, Gyarados, Alola Marowak, Nihilego, and Tapu Koko, and yeah, Albert just using the same 6 Pokemon that he used in his win at Sheffield with Porygon 2, Arcanine, Araquanid, Nihilego, Tapu Bulu, and Magnezone.
Really nice turn here for Albert. It looks like his Magnezone is actually trapping the Celesteela in the position. So Marowak switching in to try and threaten it here, and the Araquanid coming in its place. Celesteela revealing the Flamethrower here, not too afraid of taking any Electric-type damage because Marowak would be able to redirect it, and getting a nice Flamethrower onto Magnezone, which heals a little bit back using its leftovers.
Yeah, and realizing that Porygon 2 doesn't really do too much against the Hariyama and the Celesteela, despite the fact that of how much damage that frustration did in the first turn. Albert decided to switch in the Araquanid, which can also do a decent chunk to the Celesteela, and also really helps against that Marowak. Now I wonder whether he anticipated this Marowak to come in, since he did not go for a Thunderbolt, but instead, yeah, probably expected this Lightning Rod Pokemon to switch in and went with a Flash Cannon instead.
Yeah, and a really nice option there available for Albert to be able to trap that Celesteela in and just take time to deal with it. Araquanid in a nice position to deal some massive damage to Marowak. Magnezone not protecting last turn also means that it can buy a turn and not eat a Flare Blitz this time, and instead just switching out. He's going to bring in the Nihilego instead, another really great way to threaten that Lightning Rod user on for Marowak there. Marowak having to protect to stop any sort of Water-type damage coming out from that Araquanid. Celesteela, sorry, going to be using Flamethrower now, once again trying to just get the knockout onto Magnezone. But Nihilego eating that up with his high special defense stat, and we are going to see the Z move, Waterium Z, Hydro Vortex from that Araquanid, and it's going to do some big damage.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, one of those single strongest Z moves that you can get without any boost, thanks to that Water Bubble ability, doubling the power of any water type attacks, is that Araquanid now coming through with that Hydro Vortex, hitting the Celesteela, and yeah, that's gonna take it out potentially. Just barely doesn't, but yeah, that's still so much damage, and with Celesteela being one of the best answers you can have for Nihilego, yeah, Albert is certainly happy to see the HP being as low as that.
Yeah, and also a really just nice turn for Albert to not waste his Z move into that Protect on the Marowak. Araquanid not taking any damage that turn, Nihilego taking minimal damage, and being able to do a lot to that Celesteela already. Hariyama replacing the Marowak now is going to be able to put some fake out pressure next turn, and also be able to possibly eat an attack from this Nihilego, depending on how it's trained and what item it has. Gyarados coming in Celesteela's place to drop an Intimidate onto that Araquanid, so down to -1 physical attack stat. Nihilego doesn't really matter too much there, as the Power Gem is going to be launched. It's going to go into that Marowak slot. Hariyama not going to take too much damage there, surviving in the red now and eating a big berry.
Okay, that was actually a very good switch in then for Eric, who took so much damage from the frustration before, but just not enough to activate that berry. And Gyarados on the other side also should be able to take that liquidation kind of well after the Intimidate. Getting the defense drop though, which might hurt it a little bit as the battle continues. But that Gyarados, as we've seen before, has Bounce with the Flinium Z, so that is one of the ways that Gyarados can actually really take out that Araquanid in one hit. And yeah, Albert really needs to watch out for that.
Yeah, with Nihilego being able to outspeed the Gyarados at this point in time, it really looks like a Hariyama fake-out must go into that slot to be able to protect the Gyarados from any sort of power gems, but Araquanid probably wanting to switch out here and protect itself for later on in the game.
Yes, definitely, because of how well it can take on that Alolan Marowak that we know Eric has in the back, and also against that Hariyama. So as soon as Eric has used his C move, it looks like it's kind of difficult for him to threaten that Araquanid. But we're actually just seeing the Z move right there and then, and it looks like he expected his opponent to just stay in, and that is what happened. So Eric Rios, if that targets down the Araquanid, he might be one step closer to advancing into the top 8 tomorrow. Yeah,
really ballsy play from Albert Boss there to keep his Araquanid in face of this Flinium Z Gyarados, and it's such an interesting option to be able to apply huge damage, as you're going to see. How fast does that HP bar drop? obviously we see a lot of Waterium Z on the Gyarados, but Flyinium Z, a lot of neutral damage on some very relevant Pokemon.
Yeah, certainly, and that Araquanid, as we were saying, is really a very good Pokemon to have in this matchup. Now he gets to switch into the Magnezone, but we know that Alolan Marowak is in the back, and now it's a game where if Eric somehow manages to knock out the Nihilego, then Magnezone can't really touch anything anymore if the Marowak is on the field, and yeah, Albert's team being like a team that is really like defensive in a way, like he really needs all of the pieces available to him to play to the best of his like potential.
Yeah.
Yeah, and now, yeah, with that Araquanid being eliminated, I think that was one of the best Pokemon on his team against Eric's team, and had he switched, say, into the Magnezone or just protected that turn, then yeah, without the Flyinium Z or without the Z move being an option for Eric then anymore, that could have been a different battle.
But we are where we are. Celesteela is going to be switching it in place of that Hariyama, and Power Gem coming out onto that Gyarados picks up the knockout here, so a critical hit going into that slot. Nihilego will be taking a nice beast boost here for its trouble, but Eric Rios not really happy with how that turn shaked out. Flash Cannon coming out from the Magnezone here, going to be doing a bit of damage to Celesteela. Will it pick up the knockout? It will, so
wow.
a two Pokemon swing in this last turn.
Yeah, I was saying, like, hey, if he finds a way to knock out that Nihilego, that would be great, and it looks like it's just very, very difficult for him to do that with the Pokemon that he selected, and after that Celesteela took so much damage from the liquidation or the Hydro Vortex, exactly, and yeah, so he was able to get the KO there, and I also got the KO on the Gyarados. Eric potentially expecting that to survive the Power Gem, and yeah, but the critical hit definitely sealed that, and now he's down to his last two Pokemon all of a sudden, even though he was up a Pokemon just a turn ago, so that's how quick things can go if they go wrong.
Yeah, and it's going to be all to play for here in this final round of the Bilbao Special Championships. Hariyama putting a lot of fake-out pressure onto that Nihilego, which will have to switch. He doesn't want to not be able to knock out that Marowak later on in the game. Porygon 2 coming in its place. The download boost is going to activate. It's going to get a special attack boost, so usually the boost of choice for Porygon 2, but Magnezone is going to eat the fake-out instead, so a nice read from Eric here. Magnezone is going to flinch, and the Shadow Bone is going to go into that slot as well. Very, very nice play.
Okay, that's one down, 2 to go from Eric's side. And now, thanks to that berry, the Hariyama might now be in at an HP range where it's really difficult for Albert to knock it out. This is like, I don't know, it's like really tough because Marowak. So okay, so Eric could probably focus down the Nihilego and maybe take it out this turn, but then the Marowak also has trouble to knock out the Porygon 2 if he like loses Hariyama in the process, for example, because Porygon 2 can just like recover, and the only really damage option that Marowak has available to it would be that Flare Blitz, so he would take a lot of recoil in the process. So it's like really difficult now, and both trainers need to really think about what they want to do, which Pokemon they want to keep, and because it looks like Hariyama is the one Pokemon on Eric's end now that would be like, it's good against both Pokemon, whereas Marowak has like its troubles against both of Albert's last Pokemon.
And with access to knockoff on Hariyama's side, and also to possibly close combat as well, if he can deal with this Nihilego in such a way, Hariyama against Porygon 2 could be an interesting matchup. Nihilego is going to be protecting itself now. Marowak also using Protect, not wanting to eat a Power Gem, so both of these Protects will be burnt for next turn. Hariyama goes directly for the close combat into Nihilego, so buying into that Protect, and the return coming out from Porygon 2 onto the Hariyama, taking it down into the yellow. So again, nudging his way to victory, getting a little bit more HP damage onto the Hariyama.
Yeah, Albert coming through here with the right play, making the read, getting the right target, and Eric now probably kicking himself, thinking like, oh, if I just double target the Porygon, then maybe I just win the game and I advance to the top 8. But now it looks like he'll have to work a little bit harder in order to do that. Of course, this game still isn't over. Marowak could maybe try to go for a repeated Protect. However, Albert could also then try to seal things up and go after the Hariyama with both of his Pokemon. And it looks like that's exactly what he's doing. Wow.
Wow. Didn't go for the Power Gem onto the Marowak, expecting the double Protect, and got the pickup onto the Hariyama. The knockout is done. Hariyama has left the field. Another beast boost for Nihilego. The Ice Beam going to go into the Marowak, doing minimal damage, but Nihilego, I'm getting a freeze. A little bit cheeky there, but Nihilego in a position now to pick up this game and take it to a best of 3.
Yeah, certainly. So that Power Gem will just knock out the Marowak, and yeah, Albert really proving to have a plan for the end game here, even after his Araquanid was just one-hit KO'd by Eric's Gyarados. And yeah, really the two Z moves really making such a big impact here. At first it looked like Eric getting the big Vinium Z Supersonic Sky Strike onto that Araquanid, getting the one-hit KO. That would really put him in such an advantage that would be very difficult for Albert to come back. But earlier in the game we also saw Albert going for his own Z move against the Celesteela, doing around like 90% of HP.
Huge damage.
And yeah, with Celesteela being out of the picture, his Nihilego really proved to be worth the spot on this team there, doing so much damage and taking so many KOs there.
We spoke about it in several regionals before. Nihilego has such an interesting place in the metagame for the video game championships in 2017 and 2018 because it's got such good attacking options in rock-type damage to threaten things like Marowak, which protects Celesteela, and also Fairy-type super effective hits with its poison-type damage. And once he started to get rid of that Celesteela and really work hard on being able to limit the amount of time it could spend on the field, Nihilego could run rampant.
Exactly. That's why the combination of Magnet Pull, Magnezone, and Waterium Z Araquanid alongside that Nihilego is so powerful, because you can trap in the Celesteela and then do so much damage with the Z move, or if there's no Marowak inside, then also just go for straight up for the Thunderbolt. But yeah, with Marowak having like it's gotten a little more popular again. So now, yeah, Albert had to improvise there a little bit, going for multiple flash cannons in the process, but one of them was actually able to knock out the Celesteela of his opponent after, of course, taking that Z move previously.
Yeah, so if you're Eric in this position, Marcus, where do you go from here? You've obviously got Marowak, which threatens some of the key components of Albert's defensive core, and you probably want to bring that again. If you're using the Gyarados here, you really need to try and make sure you can get rid of that Araquanid as quickly as possible before it starts making life difficult for that Celesteela.
Yeah, I like the 4 Pokemon that Eric brought in that game. However, as you were saying, something a little more against that Araquanid could be helpful. Both the Nihilego and the Tapu Koko would provide that. So maybe Eric has to decide on which Pokemon he wants to leave on the bench for this final game of the day here, actually, in Bilbao. Because yeah, that Araquanid just proved to be so strong, and we didn't even see the Trick Room being set up by Albert. He just stayed there, and Celesteela just can't really do too much against an Araquanid. Gyarados can't really do too much after the Z move was already used. And Hariyama also can't really do too much. It can't knock off, close combat doesn't really do too much. So Araquanid, very good choice here. And yeah, let's see if Eric decided to switch things up and whether Albert will rely on his Araquanid once again.
We are in the final game here, in the final round of the Bilbao Special Championships. Albert Boss at 1 with Arcanine and Magnezone, and Eric Rioche also at 1 with Marowak and Celesteela on the field.
Yeah, so already a switch up here by Albert with that Arcanine coming out, the Pokemon that we haven't seen in the previous game. Eric on the other side going with 2 Pokemon that we have seen, though switching things up and playing them in a little bit of different order. I think one of the cool things about Albert and Eric's teams is the fact that you can basically combine every Pokemon with anything, and depending on what you expect your opponent to bring, then you can really come up with some crazy lead combinations like that Arcanine and Magnezone, which really seems to be favorable here against the Marowak and the Celesteela.
Going straight for the Flare Blitz into the Celesteela. No protects coming out from Eric's side of the field, taking it down to just about a third of his HP and taking a lot of recoil damage in the process. Shadow Bone coming out from the Marowak, going into that Arcanine again. Arcanine taking a big damage, but with the attack drop from the Intimidate, Marowak not being able to do too much or put it into barrier range, and a Leech Seed for its trouble onto the Arcanine.
Yeah, so Eric knew that he could probably take that Flare Blitz, as he did, and then also with the Leech Seed and the Leftovers recovery, yeah, the Celesteela looks a little bit more healthy than it did just right after that Flare Blitz. So correctly identifying that Albert would probably not want his Magnezone to take a hit here because of Flare Blitz just being a straight 1-hit KO unless that Magnezone had Sturdy ability. So yeah, Magnezone going for that Protect, and Eric, even though it looked like, he's taking that Flare Blitz here, no, Arcanine of his opponent is in Shadow Bone KO range, and Celesteela being protected by Marowak's Lightning Rod can really gain on some HP, and Magnezone is now in a tough position.
Yeah, really good spot for Eric to find himself in with so much damage being dealt to Arcanine, both by Shadow Bone and by its own recoil. Celesteela also getting that Leech Seed onto it as well, and still being able to protect this turn. Magnezone probably wants to switch out this turn, but instead it's just going to sit in and possibly take a big Flare Blitz from the Marowak here. So a Protect going, the Flare Blitz going into the Protect onto Celesteela, and a substitute coming out from Magnezone, outspeeding the Marowak, so not being able to be knocked out this turn, but Marowak will go into that substitute. It will fade here, so a nice turn for Albert to be able to keep his Magnezone around, but just imagine that there was going to be a Flare Blitz coming out.
Yeah, and now there's even more recovery for that Celesteela. I gotta imagine that there's potentially now that Barry on that Arcanine, so it's a little bit more healthy, and we've seen how little damage that Shadow Bone from Marowak did to the Arcanine after being intimidated. So Arcanine is now in a position where it can probably like take a round of attacks, but yeah, look at that Celesteela's health.
Yeah,
it was down in the orange, now it's all the way back in the healthy green, and yeah, another Flare Blitz probably wouldn't even be enough to knock it out here.
It's pretty gross how quickly it all adds up with leftovers and Leech Seed, and this is one of the things that Celesteela is really known for, and it's such a threat for just being able to sit there and get those Leech Seeds and make you force you to switch out and move around and not be able to stick to your strategies. But speaking of sticking to strategies, Flare Blitz once again from Arcanine into that Celesteela.
I think this should be Flash Cannon to just ensuring to get the KO.
I don't know, from that position that Albert has put his head in his hands. I don't think he's gone for it. Oh my god.
The Thunderbolt. He expected that Marowak to switch out, but no. And that could be really, really bad here for him. I thought he was going to go for the Flash Cannon because, of course, if he has the Magnapole ability that we expect him to have, since the Celesteela didn't really try to switch out of that unfavorable position, it's really, really, yeah, tough for him to, like, after Celesteela just protected, it looked like just a Flare Blitz and a Flash Cannon, ensuring that that goes down to set up for the Nihilego endgame again, like he did in the second game. That looked to be really promising, but instead he expected the Marowak to switch out here because, hey, who would go for a Thunderbolt in face of Marowak?
Yep.
But in the end, that didn't pay off, and yeah, Marowak taking that attack, no damage taken, and knocking out the Magnezone in return.
If you have Thunderbolt being redirected by Lightning Rod on your VDC bingo, it did just happen. Arachnid is going to come in now, threatening massive damage onto both Celesteela and Marowak, but with the Magnezone gone, Celesteela has the opportunity to switch out.
Yeah, finally, but doesn't even want to anymore. I mean, he could also just protect, take another round of leftovers recovery, maybe also Leech Seed if that Arcanine doesn't leave the field. But now he has his second key player in this matchup, a Rockwind, on the board. And yeah, it looked like Marowak and Celesteela would have a hard time against Magnezone and Arcanine already, but somehow Eric has managed to maintain both of his Pokemon alive, whereas Albert already had some losses there in his Pokemon line, and Porygon is the last Pokemon on Albert's side, so yeah, decided to go with that and not the Nihilego.
So that would have been a good option, especially with this Gyarados coming in. He would have been able to threaten some big damage onto both Marowak and Gyarados. Instead, Gyarados is able to get the Intimidate onto this Araquanid, Shadow Bone going into the Porygon 2 slot, and a Toxic going directly onto that Marowak instead.
Yeah, so it looks like yeah, Albert expected the Marowak to switch out for the Gyarados, because Liquidation, of course, also could have just knocked out the Marowak straight away. However, he still switches in the Porygon into the slot that gets Shadow Bone, but it looks like, yeah, Eric just really having all 4 Pokemon now. Nihilego not showing up to the battle here. Yeah, interesting choice by Albert, because Nihilego really, as we were saying, proved to be so valuable in the second game that we saw. We couldn't of course follow along with the first game, so we don't really know what happened there. But it looks like to me that Nihilego and Araquanid are 2 of the main Pokemon that he needed in this matchup. Now, foregoing one of them to can still work out if Araquanid somehow can pull through and carry all the weight on its own, but it's going to be difficult now.
Yeah, especially with staring down that Gyarados. If there is going to be a Flynium Z attack going into that slot, Arcanine will go down here and Albo will be left with only 2 Pokemon remaining. And there's a nice little Intimidate going onto that Gyarados and the Hariyama here, but there's going to be a lot of damage going. Oh no, Gyarados doesn't want to attack into that Araquanid slot, instead possibly reading into a Protect, but the Trick Room from Porygon 2 looks like a nice play just to try and get this favor back into Albert's side of the court.
But Eric used this turn to get his Hariyama on the field, and now that Hariyama threatens the clean KO on the Arcanine with a close combat potentially. It could also just go ahead and go for a fake out into Porygon, and then Gyarados can take out the Arcanine. So while Albert really now gets to set up his Araquanid for later on in the game, because as we were saying, Araquanid really such a strong Pokemon against all 4 of Eric's Pokemon, but we're not seeing any of that. Instead, it's just going to be an Ice Beam and a single attack from that from Arcanine. after we seeing the knockoff eliminating the Eviolite from Porygon 2.
Yeah, Flare Blitz going out from that Arcanine. You imagine it's going to go into that Hariyama slot. Oh no, it's going to go into the Marowak, just trying to get some damage onto that Gyarados. Marowak eating up some attacks here, and a really nice play to get the knockoff onto that Porygon 2, just to remove the Eviolite and make the calculations for a close combat, if Hariyama has it, a bit more favourable for Eric to manage.
Yes, there's a couple of combinations where it's like first you knock off the Eviolite and then the close combat can come really, really close to already getting that KO on the Porygon 2. Or maybe even just getting the KO. So it looks like Eric really in a solid position here with that Hariyama under trick room that his opponent set up for him. Switching in that Marowak can also mean that he could go for a Shadow Bone into Arcanine now, and Albert can't really switch out into his Araquanid really. So yeah, Albert really being pinned down here in this position.
Another Ice Beam coming out from that Porygon 2 into that Hariyama. Looks like it has the Thick Fat ability, as it's not taking too much damage here. A Perish Song coming out from the Marowak, just making sure that Albert knows that he's only got a certain number of turns for his Pokemon to stick around. A Flare Blitz coming out from that Arcanine into that Hariyama once again, and look how little damage that is doing. Arcanine is going to almost knock itself out in this position as well.
Yeah, so I'm not super sure if I agree with Eric's decision to go for Perish Song right here. Of course, if he was able to, like, say, knock out that Arcanine this turn, then the Porygon 2 really could not have done anything anymore and would have just fainted after 3 turns. But now, since Arcanine is still around, and since he just went for the knockoff instead of a potential close combat, which definitely would have knocked out that Arcanine, now Albert still potentially could switch out of that. So maybe instead just going for like a Shadow Bone or the combination of like close combat and Perish Song, that definitely could have ended the game right there, I think. But with how things went, the Araquanid is still a factor that Eric needs to deal with.
And it comes in onto the field now. Ice Beam from Porygon 2. Going to pick up the little bit of extra onto the Marowak needed to knock it out. So Marowak will not be able to move this turn. Returning to its trainer, taking a nice long rest. And Hariyama finally reveals that close combat. It's going to go into that Porygon 2 and does a nice chunk of damage there, even with the Eviolite removed. Doesn't pick up the knockout though. So defense and special defense dropping in its place. And Albert's in a position now where Araquanid in a position to really threaten a lot of the Pokemon on Eric's side of the field.
Yeah, so this might be just the Gyarados coming in for Intimidate, and then also you have the threat of just going for the Supersonic Sky Strike. But if Albert can read into that and protect on the right turn, then yeah, Gyarados might have a hard time taking out the Araquanid, really.
Yeah, this is one of the things that you were mentioning in the previous match that we saw, is that timing this Supersonic Sky Strike is going to be key to how Eric progresses in this game. And Porygon 2, on such low amount of HP, it really needs to recover to be able to stay around, or switch out into that Arcanine to get the Intimidate onto the 2 physical attackers and just remove that Perish Song.
Yeah, exactly. It's really an awkward situation here because both the Hariyama and the Porygon kind of like don't want to switch, but at the same time, if they just like stay around, it gets so predictable next turn, because if they would stay another turn after this one, then they will just faint from the Perish Song. So Albert is the first one to go ahead and withdraw his Porygon, bringing in Arcanine. He probably knows that this might go down this turn, but at least he gets off an Intimidate on both, on 2 physical attackers, which is always a good feeling.
Yeah, good utility, and removing that that Perish Song. But also, Eric's willing to pay ball as well and take out his Hariyama, bringing the Celesteela in its place. And we're going to see the Gyarados go for a Protect here, just making sure that he can waste a potential Z-move coming out from Araquanid, but instead it's going to be the Liquidation. It's going to go into that Celesteela slot and pick up a knockout here.
Ooh, and this could be really dangerous now for Eric, because all of a sudden he's the one who's down to only 2 Pokemon. Yeah, the same thing happened in the previous game as well. He was up with 4-3, but then lost 2 Pokemon before his opponent lost a single one. So now I really think that this turn where he just left the Arcanine on just 3 HP really comes back to bite him now. However, he still has the Hariyama. His Gyarados is still very healthy, and Albert still needs to find a way to take that out. And as long as Gyarados is a factor, yeah, I think Eric is still the favorite to win this game.
Do you see a Fake Out coming out from the Hariyama this turn, or a possible Feint to try and pick up any Protects on the Araquanid?
If he has Feint, then he should probably just go for it. He can either go for it now, or go for Feint on the Arcanine, and then ensure that he can go for the combination next turn without Albert being able to do anything about this.
Instead, he's just going to go for that Fake Out, and the Gyarados is going to go for the Waterfall instead. So no C-moves coming out from the Araquanid, who can't move this turn due to the Fake Out, and Arcanine going down after getting a nice little extreme speed onto the Gyarados. So Albert Boss down to his final 2 Pokemon now, Porygon 2 and Araquanid, up against Eric Rioche's Gyarados and Hariyama.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a solid play here for Eric, just going for the Fake Out, ensuring that Araquanid is not going to KO his Hariyama, and then also just knocking out the Arcanine. And now, yeah, it's 2 Pokemon apiece, and once again, it's really hard to call this game, but once again, I do believe that this Gyarados yeah, is probably the key factor here in this encounter.
Well, Gyarados has the opportunity to protect this turn. We are assuming that Hariyama with the berry might have protect as well. It usually doesn't, so we have to see how this is going. He's going straight for the Dragon Dance here. Very, very risky play coming out from Eric here. Going to boost its attack by 1 stage, and its speed is going to rise for when Trick Room goes down. Close combat from Hariyama is going to knock out the Paragon 2 here. Paragon 2 leaving the field, leaving Albert's Araquanid all lonely on his side of the field.
Yeah, I think Eric wanted to set himself up in a way that even if this Araquanid doesn't protect this turn, and if Araquanid protects next turn, and Eric goes for its Z move through the protect, then afterwards that he can still 1v1 the Araquanid due to the boost from Dragon Dance, but it's really coming down to the wire. Let's see how much this Hydro Vortex does and where it targets first of all, because if this is on the Gyarados, and if this can find the knockout, then this might be game for Albert.
So we see Gyarados HP dropping. It does not enough there. A lot of damage being dealt by that Araquanid, and now we're going to see the final turns of this game, basically. Araquanid in a position where it needs to find the knockout onto Gyarados before Trick Room ends, and then Hariyama can start to just mess around with the Araquanid, just drop a little bit of damage onto it every now and then. Gyarados probably wants to protect here.
Trick Room already ended it, I assume. So yeah, just going for the Z move seems like a solid choice here. And even if Araquanid protects this turn, which is what happens, the Z move will still do a decent chunk of damage through the protect, and you really don't want to like play any more games here at this point, because you've come so far, you boosted up your Gyarados, and it's still a Z move through protect that is super effective, and you're at boosted attack stat. So this should still do a decent amount of damage, so that afterwards, even just like a couple of waterfalls in close combats should be enough to knock out that Araquanid before it can knock out both the Gyarados as well as the Hariyama.
Gyarados' Angry Eyes ain't playing any games. It's going to do some massive damage to that Araquanid, taking down just below its HP, or half its HP, even though the Protect has been discovered there. And Gyarados now in a position where it can target it down with Waterfalls, as you said, Marcus, and then Hariyama can hopefully try and pick up the extras, or just set it up for 2 turns of knockouts.
Yeah, he could also just go for bounce here, but there's always the chance of missing, so just Waterfall seems like the more solid choice. We're seeing exactly that. Hariyama was confirmed to outspeed Araquanid before, and this is enough. So Eric Rios will advance into the top 8, and Albert Boss, yeah, coming really close to trying to like repeat success like he did at the Sheffield Regionals. This time he will be eliminated. It's also something we haven't really mentioned, but like a battle of generations in a way. Albert being someone who's been around for such a